Wallace Torres, welcome to The Deep End.
Hi, Marshall. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to chat with you. You and I know each other, actually, honestly, through On Deck prior to this. So it's fun to do one of these with someone I actually know separately from just recording something over Zoom with the studio box. But let's just start here for people who don't know you. This is a really broad conversation. We're going to talk about your company, WellTheory. We're going to talk about health and longevity. But I think it'd be best if we started with WellTheory. Like, what's the company? Like, what's the idea? Why are you building in this space?
Yeah, happy to jump into that. So WellTheory is a nutrition and lifestyle digital tool for autoimmune populations. We've been around for a little over 2 years, working with patients for a little under 2 years. I think our 2-year anniversary is coming up in the next month. And this is a really personal story. So I have two co-founders, Ellen Rudolph and Claire Rudolph. Ellen, I met through On Deck. She was in the Founders Fellowship, Cohort 3. I was in the Founders Fellowship, Cohort 5. And it was through On Deck that we became friends. And the initial nexus of WellTheory was Ellen was 25 years old and overnight ended up in the ER. And she was bedridden. No one could tell her what was happening. And she did lots and lots and lots of tests. We've actually calculated about $20,000 in medical expenses in a short period of time. And everything came back as, you're totally fine. Everything's okay. And it wasn't until she rethought a lot of her life. So what she ate, how she handled stress, how she slept, that she was able to start feeling better. And it turns out that as she's going through this journey, she started TikToking about it because she's a millennial, and that's what millennials, or she's a millennial Gen Zer, and that's what they do. And she started growing her following online. I think she's close to 100,000 followers on TikTok at this point. So she's both the CEO and an influencer on the side. And it turns out that her experience was not that dissimilar from a lot of Americans. We estimate about 15% of all Americans have autoimmune conditions. And the problem's only growing. There's over 100 different autoimmune conditions, everything from Hashimoto's or IBD to arthritis to psoriasis. These are all under this larger autoimmune bucket. So I met Ellen. She was ideating the idea. She was thinking through what this was going to be. She had done a program that we licensed that was really focused on diet and lifestyle. And in the middle of all this, my wife started having brand new autoimmune symptoms. So when I met Hazel, she had one autoimmune condition. And we had our first child, our daughter, and 18 months after that, all of a sudden, we went outside when it was a little too cold and her face turned purple. It's called the lupus butterfly effect. And we didn't know what to do. And she did the thing that she's always done whenever she's had an autoimmune flare-up, which was she changed her diet. She took out gluten, she took out dairy, she added some supplements, and everything went away. And this is happening at the exact same time that Ellen and I are becoming friends. We're going on these hikes around the Bay Area. And right around that time, we were starting to have that conversation of, do we have our second child? And with her sister experienced brand new autoimmune conditions after her second child. So we're having a real, is this even a good idea? Do we risk you getting sicker? While I'm talking to my friend about this autoimmune company. So I was living it every single day. And that's when I joined WellTheory. It just made a lot of sense. I saw it in my day-to-day life, the impact that these kinds of modification can have on people's lives.
Yeah, so help us understand how this autoimmune population in the US, like how do they typically self-diagnose or like handle these things? You started talking about this with Hazel changing her diet. Is this kind of like an arbitrary process? Like how do people actually sort through this?
That's the right question to ask. The average autoimmune patient takes about 4.5 years to diagnosis. And the diagnosis is obviously only step one in this larger journey of understanding how this chronic condition is affecting your life. The typical person will have a number of symptoms. And what's interesting about autoimmune is that there's 100 different conditions and they are categorized by body functions almost, right? If you think of IBD, Crohn's, colitis, that's going to be gastric, right? If you think of rheumatoid arthritis, that's going to be in your joints. If you think of psoriasis, that's a skin condition, so you talk to your dermatologist. And the average person is just very siloed, right? And so you have psoriasis, you start seeing rashes, maybe you'll talk to your dermatologist. Maybe some of the testing works or it doesn't work. It's useful in diagnosing what you have. And that's the beginning of the journey. For a lot of people, they'll have bloating, they'll have weird things happening in their body, fatigue, right? It's a lot of these symptoms. We like to say that a lot of autoimmune conditions are the perfect encapsulation of what women will often complain about in the healthcare system, gaslighting. I used to be clearer in the head, but now I'm a little foggy. There's no way to quantify. There's no test that's going to tell you you are 10% foggier than you used to be. You're not kind of thinking exactly how you used to. I'm a little bit more tired, right? This is something that Hazel will go through whenever she's having a flare-up. It's just 20% harder to get out of bed in the morning, right? There's no test. There's no test that's going to tell you, your energy levels are slightly down. There's no diagnostic. And so a lot of people spend many, many years just jumping from specialty to specialty, right? Before landing in the right place, finding the thing that works for them. So for WellTheory, we typically work with members that already have a diagnosis, but we do have about 10% of folks that come through and don't have one yet. The reality is there's a lot you can do before you have that diagnosis, right? The approach that we're using, which is really using nutrition and lifestyle to tackle inflammation at the end of the day, right? If you think of arthritis, it's in your joints, like I said, gastric, it's going to be in your colon or your stomach that you're going to have this inflammation. You can do a lot already. If you can, for a lot of people, take out gluten, and we try to be very specific. We'll do additional testing. For example, we had a patient who recently did a very specific protocol taking out almonds, raspberries, blueberries, couple of other very specific things for a period of time, and then slowly reintroducing them. And some of them led to symptoms, some of them didn't. And that's part of what we help you through, thinking through what might be leading to the inflammation, in addition to how to reintroduce the foods and figure out what's happening here. Because ultimately, these are hard, right? If you think, I don't know if you're a sports fan, but if you've ever heard of Tom Brady's diet, that's a lot of what these diets entail, right? You're taking out everything that is delicious in the world, right? You're taking out bread and cheese.
No strawberries.
In some of these, yeah, strawberries. In some cases it's coffee, lots of different nuts, almonds, walnuts, all these different things. That's a very restrictive diet. And so our goal is to help you figure out specifically what's happening with you so that you can then have a happier life, right? Because, eating makes people happy.
Yeah, no, there's a million questions. I guess in no particular order, I'll start with, how sustainable do you find these lifestyle changes to be for various patients? So if you're articulating this, I could get rid of almonds just like that. I bet most people get rid of almonds just like that. Coffee is at the other extreme of what would be very, very difficult. So just talk us through that part. Like A, how difficult is that for members? And then B, how do you as, a founder and you as a company, WellTheory obviously, help people through that?
I think there's a large part of what we do is meeting people where they're at. And I think that gets thrown a lot around by digital health companies, but it's something that we truly, truly do and personalize every care plan to the member. I'll give you an example. If someone comes through the door and they say, I will not give up coffee, our job is to set the right goals around, okay, so not the coffee, but can you take out these other things and let's try those things, right? And get that buy-in. I think a lot of what we do is customizing each plan so that the member is happy, right? And everyone has different goals, is what's critical at the end of the day. We have folks that they're coming in and they're operating at say 70% of what they used to be. For them, a really good goal is 85%, right? And it's about figuring out kind of the titration between those two things. There's no silver bullet. I think that's part of the reason why this stuff is hard is, like I said, it's hard to diagnose and there's just nothing, we like to joke, if you've met one autoimmune patient, you have met one autoimmune patient, right? We'll get folks that are Same race, age, diagnosis, and what makes them tick, what's leading to inflammations will be totally different. One of them will be on a very specific sleep protocol, helping improve how they sleep because that's what's leading to inflammation. Another one is it's stress that's triggering a lot of these things. So we'll put in a lot of different changes and tools for them to deal with stress better. In terms of what we're seeing folks do or how well, typically, most members can maintain a lot of these things. It's to your point, right? If you are married to coffee, we will never succeed with you by telling you to take out coffee because that's going to be a non-starter. And I think it's our job to explain to you, great, we think that the coffee would get you 5%, but there's all these other things, right? So as long as you're aware and you understand, we'll never get you to 90 because there's a couple of things that you really love. That works. And the other piece that's really critical here, it's about thinking, it's like, what's the alternative? We'll often talk about what's good or best, right? We'll tell you, take out gluten, take out dairy, and we'll have suggestions for you. Hey, this is a really good gluten-free brand. This is an even better gluten-free bread brand. And that helps in getting buy-in from folks, right? It turns out, this country has progressed so much in terms of the options that people have that it is no longer terrible to not be gluten-free, right? I mean, we live in Austin. Every restaurant you go has gluten-free alternatives, and they're usually delicious. They're going to be a little bit pricier, and we figure this out with members as well, right? If you're on a budget, hey, let's figure out the Costco version of this, right? Like, you can go to Costco, you can get some really good options that are going to be much better for you. Are they the best option? No, but that's okay. That's your goal. Your goal is to be better, not best. And just kind of titrating and changing it over time.
And you keep using the term members. Like, what's the model here? So does one, so for example, I'm a One Medical member. I pay the yearly fee. And then if I use any services, I pay a fee on top of that. What does your model look like?
So we're at a really interesting time in the company's evolution. For the first 2 years, we have been cash pay strictly, right? It's direct to consumer. You show up at our website, you click a link, you pay, you grab an appointment, and you sign up, right? The model is twice a month, live calls, and lots of other things in between. There's community elements around it. Think Facebook groups, meet Reddit groups to a degree. Everything from hey, do you have a recipe because I'm not eating almonds right now and I need another type of flour, to emotional support groups. We have these things called community connections, right? And they're typically around a specific diagnosis. We have one around Hashimoto's, around rheumatoid arthritis, right? A lot of what happens here is these are silent illnesses. You can't tell someone is in a lot of pain just by looking at them, right? You can't tell that someone is not processing how they used to by just looking at them. And so we try and make those connections. The reason it's interesting is we're currently moving into the employer and health insurance market. So we've been working and pitching self-insured employers. So, think Target, think Walmart, these very large companies, where they are paying for their own healthcare costs, right? So they're managing their own book of business, their own healthcare costs. And so we've spent the last 6 months building those relationships. We're working on our first contract. We have about 4 or 5 that are we're negotiating on. And so we're moving towards this being a benefit, right? You work for On Deck. You have a suite of benefits that you can do, everything from a 401k account to WellTheory. Hey, you can sign up for this program. Your insurance is covering for it. And obviously the big value proposition is that we've seen really good results here. If you look at qualitative results, 84% of folks have seen decrease in fatigue. 54% of folks have seen decrease in how often pain gets in the way of their lives. Over 50% of people have an improved life satisfaction score. And on the flip side, if you look at the costs, right, ultimately everything comes down to cost. We have seen about $600 per month in cost reduction in our members. So that's everything from less visits to the doctor, less emergency room visits, urgent care visits, specialist visits, procedures. And so we're in the middle of shifting it over and being this benefit that folks can sign up for. Not too dissimilar from Omada or Livongo in the diabetes space, really focused on autoimmune.
Yeah, something I'm curious about because we're having this conversation in the context of you all being a digital health company. And when I think of the advantages of any, I feel like this is very 1990s, but any digital company is the idea of scale, right? Like you can scale and you can get bigger, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But earlier in the conversation, you pointed out that there's a different autoimmune situation for every single individual patient, even when you're controlling for race, gender, income, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, how does scale work under your model from an efficiency perspective?
The key stat that I'll throw here is we have increased our scalability or our ability or efficiency really twofold in the last 6 months. What does it look like? Everyone is different, but what we're finding is 80% of folks, 90% of folks have about 80 to 90% overlap on things.
Oh, interesting.
You come in, we started moving towards standardized protocols that are then modified by the coach, right? When you come to WellTheory, you work with a registered dietitian or nutritionist and a health coach. And so for the majority of folks, they're gonna be working on specific areas and it's about the margins. It's, okay, you said this, so we're gonna modify this slightly. That's a lot of where the scale comes in, right? Building those templates, building those care plans, and allowing that 15% change from member to member. And so that 85% change is already a half-hour savings, right? Mm-hmm. That additional percent, it's gonna be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. That's part of how we think about scale. The other piece that we think of in terms of technology is there's just so much you can do in between sessions, right? When we first started, a lot of what we were doing, it was live. We were on the call modifying things with you. And a lot of what we spent the last 2 years learning are, okay, members can't work on 10 different things, right? So how can we standardize or automate the workflow before you get into a call where we try and highlight what's the one thing you want to work on today, right? This is the most important thing. These small wins lead to big wins in the long run. And so focused on, great, our sessions used to be these huge things. We'll discuss 25 different things. We're gonna discuss 2 things. We're gonna highlight them before we get into the meeting, and we're gonna save time there, right? We're not gonna spend the first 5-10 minutes asking you, what were your wins? Like, what do you wanna focus on today? We already know, we go straight into the session and we can capitalize on the half hour that we have you on the line. And the last piece is, another part that really happened live was the education, right? There's so much you need to learn when you're going on this journey, right? There's an advanced understanding on food that you're gonna have to develop over time so that you can learn to fish over time, right? The goal is, you're not a WellTheory member forever. The goal is we work with you for 6 months, very targeted, very focused, and then we built enough habits that you can now sustain them over time. And so what's that content in between? What can we feed you around, hey, this week we said we take out gluten. I'm gonna send you a bunch of information for you to do on your own time. Let's learning about why gluten leads to inflammation in your body. What are the good alternatives, brands that you can look at, recipes, all these things that don't need to happen on a live call that you build them once and really you can just use them with as many members as you need over time.
Something I'm curious about, to your point then about how a member is not going to be a WellTheory member forever. To what degree is the autoimmune category, and to your point, there's over 100 different types of things you could be addressing here, so not every part is going to be the same. To what degree is this about treatment and management versus curing the thing you're actually experiencing?
There is no cure for any of these conditions. So diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is actually a type of autoimmune condition. And I think it's a useful framework to think about in terms of, you're gonna deal with this forever, and you're gonna have ups and downs and flare-ups, and it's about teaching you the tools kits for, in the event of a flare-up, you can help yourself. A lot of this is about managing. That's just the reality of it. One of the value propositions that we have is, I'm sure you've heard of Humira, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of like the big drug that everyone talks about. There's these really expensive biologics out on the market. And they can lead to really nasty side effects. For a lot of people, they don't work as well as they should. And a lot of the value that we drive is in about 24% of folks on high-cost biologics, particularly around rheumatic conditions. So,
And sorry,
MS
what's up?
or
Can you
lupus.
clarify what a biologic is?
A biologic is a very expensive drug. There's chemical. So if you think of aspirin or acetaminophen, those are chemically made. A biologic is made using proteins. So it's almost, if you know how beer is made, which is you have a yeast culture and et cetera, you grow these drugs, right?
Okay.
You grow these drugs using cells. So these high cost biologics, there's a number of them, Humira, Enbrel. So they have pretty nasty side effects and lots of folks are going on them. And about 24% of folks that we see that are on these very expensive biologics that are about 50,000 or more per year, we see folks be able to decrease those dosages because we're helping get them in clinical remission, which means that they're getting better, they're feeling less of the symptoms, and they need less of these drugs, right? And so yeah, so that's part of the big value proposition that we're driving with folks around managing and kind of keeping them healthy over time.
Yeah, let's actually talk about you a little more then, because you've just gave us a great overview of like the industry and the category you're building in. That's one of the best ones that I've heard on this podcast. I mean that straight up. But what got you interested in the digital health longevity category in the first place?
So I've been in healthcare my whole career. I started at a company called Genentech, which is considered it was the first biopharma, right? The first one growing drugs out of cells. And their first product a long time ago was insulin. They were the first people to manufacture insulin. And I went from there, I went into medical devices after that. And over time, I just realized there was a lot that could be done outside of these drugs, right? These drugs are very expensive. We believe at WellTheory, some people need to be on them, right? We have practitioners that have their diet totally under lockdown. They're really compliant. They're in a really good place. And part of that is having that pharmaceutical agent, right? That having that, okay, this is part of my treatment plan. I don't eat gluten. I avoid certain foods. I manage my stress. And I also go to my infusion every 6 weeks or every 3 weeks or however often you need to go. But not everyone needs it, right? And we do have a cost problem in the United States around healthcare. And we're always looking for silver bullets. And ultimately going through that experience with my wife, Hazel, and seeing that there was no drug for her. Like, that's the reality. She didn't have a drug that she could turn to, so that was off the table, even if you take out the cost piece. So what else can she do? And nutrition and lifestyle have just been totally underserved historically in this country, right? If you think of nutrition as a benefit in a health plan, almost no health plans cover nutrition, right? They'll cover it very specifically around obesity, or they'll cover it very specifically around diabetes. But if you and I, hey, we just want to get healthier, we want to eat better, and I would love to talk to a dietitian, we can't, right? Mm-hmm. It's very difficult. We'd have to pay out of pocket. And there's just so much that you can do nowadays in terms of building a company that's remote, that can meet members where they're at. And I think lastly, COVID changed the game, right? I think there's been a lot of stories about these companies that blew up because of the telemedicine boom, and now they're not doing super well. But the reality is that it's just so much easier to do these appointments online. It's so much, particularly for something like we're doing, right? You don't need to go into an office to talk to us, right? That would be a waste of your time. It would be a waste of our time. It would be a waste of resources. And there's so much to be done to improve access. Something that we haven't talked about is this is affecting 15% of folks, 80% of which are women, and it disproportionately impacts communities of color, right? Lupus, for example, Black and Hispanic women are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with lupus than non-Hispanic white women. There is an access issue here, and that's always been the long-term vision of WellTheory as well, which is how do you make this access available? How do you make this kind of care available to lots and lots of folks? Our cash pay offering costs $125 a month. It's not cheap, right? And so it's like a mix of all these things put together for me of the time is right. COVID kind of changed the game around this. We need to improve accessibility, and we're not going to improve accessibility by forcing a lot of these solutions into an office. And there's just a lot that can be done still.
And I guess that's interesting because my next question was going to be, to what degree is there an opportunity for in-person, in limited context, right? So I'm not describing a, WellTheory office on every single corner of every single ex-urban block, but, maybe there's a ward where there's a center in like Williamsburg, or you're doing something downtown San Francisco. I hear there's space there. How do you think about that part?
So that's actually a conversation we've always had, right? We have to date not had clinicians, very purposely, right? We find that our average member is already working with at least three clinicians as part of their larger care.
Can you explain what a clinician is then?
Yeah, so they're working with a doctor, or they're working with a mental health professional, or a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. So clinical, right? Registered dietitians are not considered clinical, even though they're clinically trained, right? Our registered dietitians were trained at a hospital. One of them was doing cancer care, for example, before she came to WellTheory. And so we've been non-clinician led to date, just because there's so much that it can be done in the in-between, right? You see your doctor talks to you for 5 minutes. They go, great, you should change your diet. Like, you need to go take out all these foods and figure this out. They're not gonna support you through it, right? The financial model doesn't incentivize physician offices to take care of this. And this is a conversation we've had over time, which is it will hit a limit. The virtual does hit a limit, right? If you need to go get a colonoscopy, right? You need to go to the hospital. You need to go see a doctor. And as we grow WellTheory and as we think about what's next, that's a conversation we're having around when is the right time to move into a model that's more clinical center of excellence, right? Virtual clinical center of excellence, which means we have clinicians on staff. We work with you around prescriptions, around escalations, and we do as much as we can. And once we hit our wall, how do we escalate that care, right? Who's the right person to then go, great, I'm a doctor, I'm gonna call this other doctor in your area, and you're gonna go talk to them because they need to do some sort of physical check-in, et cetera. Again, this is something we talk a lot about. It's an ongoing conversation. I guarantee you this will be part of our evolution over time. Because I think the market and I think patients are looking for that intersection. It's just so siloed right now. And our members are dealing with very complex conditions where no one's talking to each other. You're seeing different specialists. There's no thread across all of them. And our goal needs to be to fill in that space more and more and more and be that connective tissue.
I'm really curious to your point about how no one's talking about this, for you to get into the community aspect, because if we're going to go over this 2-year period, a bunch of companies, like obviously On Deck is in this category, have really highlighted community as something that's important. But I think something that everyone learned is that community is literally one of the easiest things in the world to articulate as being important. It's one of the hardest things to actually implement. So like, it's easy to say, hey, like we're going to have like Facebook groups, but like, how has that worked out? And, I'm imagining like there's that first week, everyone's super excited. They're trading, the vibes are there, but then like 2 or 3 weeks later, maybe people aren't posting as much. Like how do you think about that aspect in your category?
The biggest thing that we have implemented is that if you think of Reddit and you have the super engaged moderators, that's our staff.
Oh, cool.
You do get a number of super users within the community. But yeah, a lot of it is we drive a lot of the community aspect of it, right? Our nutritionists go in there, we talk about things, we share recipes, we share posts. The other piece is community can mean lots and lots of different things. And I think this is something that On Deck did well, which was there's the Slack community piece, but there's also groups. Like I did a small group with other founders where we would talk every month or every 2 weeks. And it's a mix of these things, right? It's how do you get folks that are gonna want more of the group session, small group session in a place? How do you get folks that are okay posting? And also just acknowledging and accepting that a fair number of folks are gonna be lurkers, right? They're there to just read and find information. And it doesn't mean that they're not driving value. We get it all the time from people that never post. Oh, this community is super valuable. I love perusing it. I love, looking at it. And so, yeah, a lot of it it's manufactured is a strong word, but a lot of it is us kind of moving the conversation forward, and members will just naturally jump in and meet each other. And it's funny because we hear of folks that met through WellTheory that stay in touch after, right? They graduate into, they get better, they graduate out of WellTheory, and sometimes they'll come back because they'll have a flare-up. They're like, hey, I want to work with you for 3 more months, kind of just get a couple of things under order, and I'll move on. And then we'll hear, oh yeah, I still talk to that person that I met on your community. We started, exchanging messages. We started talking. Turns out she has, grandkids as well, like I do, and that she's dealt with this condition as long as I have. So it's a lot of work, and you're constantly nurturing it. But yeah, it is very rewarding for the folks that it reaches.
I'm curious. We spend a lot of time with founders on this podcast talking through the idea maze. How did you get different places? So we could wrap a bunch of different concepts into one with this question, because on the one hand, you and Ellen had the autoimmune impact in your personal life, through your wife Hazel. At the same time, you're going through the On Deck program, so you obviously were looking to find your next thing. And then in the case of the actual autoimmune disorders, there's hundreds of them. So there are a bunch of different directions you could go. Just kind of like walk us through, before you even started On Deck, how you sort of iterated down to what you eventually turned out with.
I got this question a lot when I was in On Deck. So I quit my job because I decided that I wanted to start a company.
Before or during COVID?
It was shortly after COVID. Sienna, my daughter, was 7 months old, and I had a crisis of faith of myself. I'd always wanted to start something, and I never had the courage. And this is a true story. One day I was just playing with her on the ground, and I remember looking at her and thinking, I hope that my daughter, is all she can be and takes risks. And then I thought about myself, and I thought, but she's gonna ask, why didn't you? And I would say, well, I had you. I couldn't take risks anymore. And I had a real crisis of faith where I remember going to the kitchen, and Hazel was there, and me saying, I need to quit my job. I need to do this. That's a very long story of my wife telling me to, poop or get off the pot. So I worked on a number of different healthcare ideas before I met Ellen. They were all in healthcare. One was a medical device company. One was in Medicaid, kind of the Medicaid space, doing care navigation. And I don't know, ideation is you just wake up every day and that's all you think about is you deep dive different areas, you try and find experts, do a lot of cold outreach to lots and lots and lots of folks that know a lot more than you so that you can learn more about a given space. I think with WellTheory, I know that Ellen and Claire's original idea was, is there a place for people to book time with functional medicine doctors? That's where this started. And as Ellen started incorporating more of these principles in our life, that kind of became the focus of the idea. When I joined, we actually were running 3 different programs, which was 3 different kinds of coaching. One was totally text-based. One was group-based, community-based only, so no live calls, and then only live calls. I think the idea maze it's a lot of dead ends. It's a lot of just being really, really focused on the idea of starting something. I'm not sure this is useful to folks, but I went all in. That was my key unlock in all this was I had to succeed because I had no more income coming in. There was a desperation that set in where you just have to figure it out because your family's making sacrifices, you're making sacrifices, the savings are drying up. and yeah, you just kind of keep going at it. And honestly, a lot of what it takes to navigate the idea maze is what is going to make you successful and actually get a company off the ground. It's a lot of sales. It's a lot of cold calling. It's a lot of getting people whose time is very valuable to give it to you for free, so that you can learn a key piece of information and go from there. So yeah, and I mean, and it's been 2 years, and what we do at WellTheory has changed so many times already. It doesn't, I think people think of the idea maze and, well, I'll have this idea and it's this beautiful idea, but what the pre-seed was raised on and what we raised the seed, and then the story we're gonna say for the Series A, those are different stories because our understanding of the space changes. In the last 6 months alone, we feel like, Ellen and I joke about this, we feel like we've gone to healthcare grad school, right? We spend so much time with employers, with insurance companies. We did the United Healthcare Accelerator, and that was just a brain dump of this is everything you need to know and more, and there's still stuff you don't know. And so it doesn't end. The idea maze doesn't end just because you've raised money or because you've started working on something. Yeah, it's ongoing.
So that's actually the perfect pivot to the last section. Obviously, most founders listening to this are going to be in the digital health category broadly. They're not just, focused on the autoimmune category. I'd love for you to give as much of a summary as possible, as little or as much information as you want to coherently offer on healthcare grad school. Like what's the gap between like the conventional wisdom that anyone interested in the space is going to actually have and that kind of like next level experience you've been through over the past 2 years?
I've gotten in trouble with saying this before, but I think that the incentive structure is very different in healthcare than it is in almost any other industry. And by that, I mean, if you think of a patient and you think of us as a solution, our customer is the patient, but not really, because typically the patient isn't paying, right? I think in healthcare, if you want to reach scale, if you want to reach impact, at some point you need to transition away from cash pay into insurance, some sort of insurance, whether it's United or Cigna or Aetna, these large insurance companies paying for your service, or it's an employer paying for the service. That's the pivot that needs to happen. And I think something I underestimated this throughout the beginning of our journey was the most important thing is figuring out how to drive value, how to reduce cost, how to pay for this thing for the person who's paying. And it's critical, obviously, for your engagement, for folks showing up, for folks signing up, that you have a really good experience for those people. But that you have two different customers and they want different things and you need to do all of the above. That was probably the biggest lesson learned for us coming from a strictly cash pay product. And as we move into this new space, and it's always unclear what is gonna drive the unlock, what is gonna lead someone to have that conversation for you. I think something we heard a lot when we were at United was, we'd look around and there's these solutions that were really focused on seniors, for example, or some of these more healthcare fintech plays that there's a number of nowadays. And then there was us, kind of focused on this functional, holistic medicine piece of improving healthcare through the use of non-clinicians. And we'd ask, why did you guys select us? We're a little different than these other companies. And what drew them to us was engagement. They said, you guys have super high engagement. Ellen's an influencer. You have, I think she's up to 20 million total views on our videos on TikTok. We can't drive 0.5% of engagement on any of our solutions, right? And so there, for us, it was learning about, okay, great. So we have this very unique thing, which is we know how to engage people. People stick around a really long time, right? I think our 1 year member retention rate is 63%. So after a year, people are paying this is a month-to-month membership, right? After 1 year, 63% of people are still around. About 75% of folks are still around after 6 months. This is unheard of in healthcare, right? These models are just not what's available. They have a hard time engaging, 0.5%. And so then it becomes, we have the secret sauce. How do we then figure out a way where everyone wins, right? So that we have the patient piece down. How do we incentivize folks? And it's about rethinking how you get paid, rethinking how you take on risk, having really high guarantees on your contracts around, you're gonna pay us this much, and we guarantee you twice as much in savings or your money back, right? This is a really hard piece. And it took us, this was months and months of figuring out the perfect pricing and packaging, and what was gonna get people to that first yes.
So for the closing question, we've kind of danced around it a bit, but On Deck played like a very literally important role in connecting you and Ellen together. We don't have to do that awkward kind of like, oh, well, you were in an On Deck Slack group when like you met this person through Twitter, so it wasn't quite, but in this case, like this actually actively happened. You were in different cohorts, you connected. Just tell like that side of like your On Deck story, and like what you really like got from that beyond the fact that we're having this conversation.
So before I joined WellTheory and we decided to build WellTheory together, I quit my job and I had given myself a year. I said, this is my year of yes. So I said yes to everything.
Sorry, I'm just laughing
one
at
of these.
The thing is too, I do need to add this editorial. When you were earlier telling the story about how like you were, with your baby and you like had this like epic conversation with yourself, the advantage of actually knowing you is that I know listeners maybe thinking like, okay, like these are all just narratives, but I know for a fact you did actively tell yourself, this is the year of yes, and I'm going to take risks. So just go on. I appreciate that about you.
It's funny that you can take this out, but we always joke because most founders, like the stories are all made up, right? Like, but it is real. Like we have, in our deck, we have the pictures of Ellen in the emergency room, for example.
Yeah.
I have the pictures on my phone of Hazel's face turning purple. It was in March of 2021. And I had just gone on a hike with Ellen. Like these things are real. These are real things that happened. Sorry, the question that you asked was, the meet cute story. So I gave myself a year to just say yes. And so I was one of these power users on Deck. You can ask the On Deck team. I did everything. I hosted a pre-seed funding meetup every week. I was everywhere. I was answering questions. I was doing this. I was reviewing decks for people. In between all this, I said, you know what, when I first joined, it was cohort 5. There were like 8 people on the On Deck team. There weren't that many healthcare founders. And so I just went through the directory and I said, I'm gonna talk to every single healthcare founder here. And so I sent out messages and I talked to half of them. And with Ellen, we joke about this, where Ellen said yes to meeting with me because I sent her multiple messages being like, hey, like checking back in, we'd love to connect. And she remembers thinking, my God, this guy is so annoying and needy. And then she got on a call with me, and you know me, Marshall. And she goes, this is my idea. And then I spent 30 minutes telling her it was a dumb idea and all the deficiencies that were missing in it. And that's Ellen's love language, is people being critical and honest with her. And that's how our friendship started. She'll admit, I was so taken aback because when you go, what you learn is a lot of people don't want to say it to your face because you never know if you'll be successful, and they don't want to be the person that you think back and are like, oh, I hate this person. Like, so they want to make sure that they leave things positively. And that's not my perspective on life, right? Like I'm going to have opinions and I'm just going to tell you my opinions. And so that's how we became friends. She disappeared. We met up again after Christmas and we started going on these hikes. We lived 20 minutes from each other in the Bay Area, and we go on these hikes and we talk, and she started sending me different ideas around the company, and I started reviewing product offerings, and I just kept being honest. She'd send me these things and there were 15 15 requirements that they were trying to hit on the first iteration of the product. And I would send back feedback and I say, what are the 3 most important things? That's all I care about. Like, you're wasting your time with everything else. And so, yeah, it just slowly developed, and I hit the 1-year mark. And at that point, we had kind of burned through our savings. And it was actually over 4th of July weekend, exactly 2 years ago. I think it's exactly 2 years ago in a couple days. I decided I was going to stop working on the other stuff I was doing, and I was going to reach out to Ellen, who had kind of months back alluded to, hey, do you want to join me? Like, do you want to partner on this? And I had said, no. I said, you cannot, you have raised money. Like, I don't have money. Like, it's too enticing. And we decided that weekend that I would join WellTheory, that we were going to leave the Bay Area because we had kind of burned through our savings, and that we were going to have another kid. And so on Tuesday, I talked to Ellen and I accepted the offer. And on Wednesday, we found out that Hazel was pregnant already. So it was just kind of the serendipitous everything came together moment. But anyhow, I think I'm not sure I answered your question in the end.
No, you did, because my question was actually just, how did the on-deck experience influence your journey to where you are now? And I think at a very literal level, it's all really there, and there's a lot of going through. No, and I think it's also just, I really appreciate how you combine both that willingness to be critical with also just like the engagement, because usually you get one or the other. Like, usually someone's just sort of like kind of annoying in the Slack, and then it just doesn't really lead anywhere. But like, you're both persistent, which is a euphemism for being annoying, but you're also like offering critical and valuable feedback. So I think that's a great takeaway in general for anyone who's participating in any group. Well, Wallace, this has been super fun. This has been really interesting. Where should folks go beyond just Ellen's TikTok to learn more about WellTheory and what y'all are up to?
So you can go on our website, welltheory.com. You know, as we're moving into B2B, we're still running the cash pay offering, so anyone can join. We've worked with over 50 different conditions to date. Again, everything from psoriasis to different kinds of arthritis to Crohn's, colitis, Hashimoto's, Graves. You can find us there. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. And for, on-deck folks, I'm on the on-deck Slack still, so you can still ping me. I'm very slow to respond nowadays, but yeah, I'm still there.
Thanks again for joining us in the deep end.